Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and every Friday at this time we try to bring you news on management and leadership topics of these troubling times. Now today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome two companions who are both serial entrepreneurs. And as I know, many of you will be interested in exploring your entrepreneurial opportunities coming out of this crisis. The first is Edwina Dunn, who founded dunnhumby and then went on to found and share Starcount as well as The Female Lead. And the second is Duncan Cheatle, who launched Startup Britain a few years back and has founded the Supper Club and is now Chief Exec and founder of LearnAmp. So welcome to both of you. And I'm going to kick off with the questions. My first question is quite simply that a lot of entrepreneurs have been very hard hit by this crisis. And how can they best develop the resilience that they need to survive? How have you managed this? What advice would you give them? Why don't I start with you, Edwina?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for your welcome. Yeah, I mean, they are really hard times. I don't think anybody's gone through anything like this before. I mean, we started dunnhumby in the mouth of a recession back in 1989, and we thought that was bad. This is scary, I think, for everybody. And I think, you know, my first thoughts are that you have to face the fear. You have to face that nothing is going to be the same. And I always turn to the quote of Charles Darwin, who actually is often misquoted. It's not the strongest of the species that survive. It's the most adaptable. So here's something that we have to think about, adaptation. And I think, you know, when we're scared, we all tend to revert to what we know best. And of course, the definition of madness is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. We can't go back to doing what we were doing. It's just simply not going to work. And for me, if I turn to my own industry, I think, you know, for a long time, people have been rather stuck in a form of data science that looks rear view mirror. It's about what people have done, who keep, you know, it's a repetition of transactions and purchase and behavior, and it's all rear view mirror. And, you know, I've been thinking for a long time about how can you predict and see what people want to do, hope to do, aspire to do. And I think this moment will fuel a new kind of working, which is all about predicting what people are going to do. And I think it will be fueled by what people care about, what they're passionate about moving forwards. And we have to learn that new data science.
Wow, that's a great learning there. Duncan, what are your thoughts on this question? What advice would you give? So Duncan has been having a few technical issues. So we'll come back to Duncan, and meanwhile, I will stick with Edwina. So Edwina, you said you started your dunnhumby, your first business, coming out of a recession. Millions are going to be unemployed coming out of this crisis, and many of them will think, as you did, about starting their own business as a result. What advice would you give them, and which sectors do you think they should target? And how can government and other communities best support them?
Well, you know, there have been quite a lot of conversations already about this. I think there's no doubt that everybody out there is interested in the whole supply chain of businesses. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the idea of, you know, bringing in a sort of strong,
can't see the chat, they were
a strong supply chain, making sure that the biggest businesses supported by their suppliers are all helped in this sort of new ecosystem. And I think a way of doing this is to focus on what data that we need. I mean, we all know that the conversation around COVID has all been around track and trace. It's all been around data and collecting data. I don't think I've ever in my career heard so much conversation about it. So I think the one thing that's for sure is data is going to be a big part of the future, and that every business is going to need to get its hands on data. But you know, it's probably easier for the biggest businesses to be able to invest, to have people who understand it and people who can manipulate it and predict. And what I would love to see, and what I'd love to encourage government, is for them to support for smaller businesses to be part of this benefit, so that somehow the strongest can support the smallest of SMEs, the smallest of businesses. Because actually, if the small businesses fail, so too will the big businesses. You know, we're all kind of connected in a big supply chain. So I would advise for people to think about their whole supply chain and how they can create an environment where data is more used, more shared, more understood, and that the weakest are supported by the strongest. And I think in that way, it could be a really good ecosystem.
That's a great example, and we know that the super giants, Google and Facebook, often say that most of their revenue is coming from small businesses. So there's an opportunity right there. Now, I have on my screen a notion that Duncan will be back joining us, but I don't see him yet. So I'm going to oh, he might be coming. So, but I will crack on, and I'll ask the next question to Edwina, and then Duncan, I'll bring you in on this and other questions as well. So Edwina, this is right up your street. There's a big lack of diversity, as we know, in startups and in the tech sector and in the funding of startups, where it's very difficult for women and for minorities. What, in your view, can and must be done to address this?
Yeah, it's such a challenge, and unfortunately it never seems to get better or go away. I wish I could say that it did. I have read and seen data that shows very clearly that it is women who are being disproportionately affected as entrepreneurs, as small businesses, even as employees. They are losing more jobs, more economic wealth. And so, you know, we don't have parity. That's the first thing we've got to be really clear about. And, you know, for me, I have a campaign called The Female Lead, and it has a very simple premise, which is you can't be what you can't see. If we don't start showing women being successful in all sorts of careers, where perhaps women are less, they're less able to see themselves as role models, but they actually are role models, then if we can get those stories shared, we can bring more women into the arena and have them more active, both as business people, entrepreneurs, looking for investment, making the right pitches, having the right strength. So for me, it's all about showcasing great stories. I mean, you're a fantastic role model, Anne. You're up there sharing your stories and sharing others. I mean, that's what we need to do. So it is all about that showcase of breadth and depth of talent that is just invisible right now.
Yes, well, and certainly the Female Lead is helping with that visibility. I know it's mushroomed, and you're almost at 1 million followers so on LinkedIn and many other social media channels. Now, Duncan, are you with us now? Can you hear us and we can hear you?
I can't.
Oh, I heard you. It may be difficult. If you can hear me, could you?
I can't hear anything.
Okay. All right. I'm so sorry about this, folks. We're going to keep trying again. Meanwhile, Edwina, fascinating discussion. So we'll just carry on our discussion here, and I understand we have tons of questions as well. So no doubt we'll be able to use the time nicely. So last week I spoke to a couple of sustainability experts, and they said actually the only recovery is a green recovery. Excuse me. And they were saying we've simply got to come out of this crisis addressing the climate crisis and the need to be carbon neutral by 2050. How do you think entrepreneurs can help to make this happen?
Well, I think entrepreneurs are brilliant at seeing where there is demand, where there is a gap that needs to be filled. And I think for sure we have all woken up much more to the fact that, when we all stopped getting in planes and trains and cars, everything looked nicer and clouds seemed to disappear and smog over Beijing disappeared. So I think we are now much more aware of it. I think also we've all taken great succor from nature around us. And I think we've opened our eyes and enjoyed it. We've enjoyed going out for walks, thinking about how to make our bodies healthier. And I'm not sure alcohol came completely off the list during all of lockdown, maybe not enough, but I think we are all much more aware of it. And I think as such, entrepreneurs will identify with what consumers, citizens want. I genuinely believe that our use of social media, we have, for the Female Lead, millions and millions of followers on social media. They tell us what they believe in every day. Never have I seen such a fantastic wealth of opinion that's served up in such an easy way. Social media tells us, do people care about food wastage? Do they care about plastic free? Do they care about the oceans or the cities or the animals or, it's all signal there. So these signals are out there. I think there is so much work that can be done in understanding them, deciphering them. I think all of that will help many, many businesses become more astute and more timely in how they talk to people, how they talk to both consumers and citizens. Because, the reality is we're no longer going to think just about the brand. You only have to look at what happened to Boohoo. When suddenly, we had the situation in Leicester with all the sweatshop workers suddenly coming down with COVID. There was this enormous explosion of public opinion. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get more obvious, much clearer that brands are linked to their supply chain. Their supply chain has a responsibility to sustainability, and no one is going to let the brands forget about that. So we have to understand what people care about. Social media is probably one of our best tools. My current thesis, I started off with you are where you live in my early days. When I worked with Tesco, it was you are what you buy or what you eat. And now I passionately believe it is what you love that defines you. And of course, what you love is more than brands. It's that you love your planet, you love your family, you love your community. That's what defines us. And I think that is going to give businesses new data, new fuel, a new vision of what they can build on in this new, scary market.
Well, that's incredible insight and lots of tips there for sectors, for wannabe and would-be entrepreneurs or accidental entrepreneurs of where to look for opportunities. Now I'm seeing again that Duncan might be ready to join us. And let's see if we can get him up. Duncan, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh.
It's just amazing.
The irony of being a tech founder. I'm so sorry, everybody.
That's all right. It happens to everybody.
Late to the party.
Don't worry, Duncan. So I would love for you to share your thoughts on, for the millions of unemployed that may, coming out of COVID, have to look to start a business. How can they best do that? Where can they look? How can government help them? What advice would you give them?
I think first of all, working out or take stock and decide what they'd like to do. Do they have a big idea that they want to scale, or actually is there something they love doing and they just want to be their own boss and actually not depend on an employer anymore? Because I think too many people get an idea and rush off and find an investor instead of maybe deciding who their customer might be first. And not everybody wants to work all the hours that are required to build the kind of scale up and successful business that Edwina did. So I think working out first of all what's your primary goal. Do you want something that's a lifestyle business, as many people describe it, something that works with the lifestyle you have now? And secondly, do something you love, because it's just so much easier to get motivated to go out and find a customer or investors if you go that route, if it's something you're absolutely passionate about. As for kind of government advice, I would say I'm generally a great believer that if they are consistent and don't change things too much, they should just get out of the way. I don't think they're probably the first port of call for anything for a founder. But speaking to a peer group, I mean, I set up the Supper Club 17 years ago, very much about bringing together scale up. So not perhaps immediate startups, but a peer group environment, such a wonderful way to bounce ideas, particularly in difficult situations that we all find ourselves in now. And a great way to sort of air what you might do, or in a safe place where if you start building out a team, you maybe don't want to sort of discuss all of the options if some of them involve whether it's hiring or firing, which a lot of people are unfortunately having to face right now. So I think accessing a peer group that you trust, and deciding what it is that you want. Do you want to scale a business or just build a small team that's something a little bit more manageable, perhaps with other work-life balance kind of challenges?
Mm-hmm. That's great advice, and building on Edwina's thought about we are what we love, and you're saying do what we love. I want to come back and ask you the diversity question that I raised with Edwina. We were talking about the sad and still shocking lack of women and actually minorities in startup funding and scale ups. Edwina, the founder of the Female League, focused on the gender issue. What do you think we can do to tackle the race issue and getting more diverse community representation?
Sure. Well, there was one stat, if you didn't already share it, Edwina, I'm sorry, which I thought was absolutely frightening on the gender thing, and then I'll move on and answer that question, Anne, which was in 2017, I gather there was only 1% of all VC funding went to female. Is that a stat you've already quoted?
No.
I mean, absolutely terrifying. I mean, I think it's great to see what you're doing, Edwina. On the race thing, I've seen recently, which I think is really, really encouraging, a number of people stepping in to increase diversity and race. So there are VCs focusing particularly on that. Cornerstone VC, Impact X Capital. There are people like Dan Murray who run a very successful, regularly #1 kind of business podcast called The Secret Leader, but they're now doing a piece around particularly for Black and BAME founders called Represented. And I think more generally, there's another guy, Gary Stewart, who was at part of the Wire Accelerator, who set up something called Nest, which is all about content for Black founders. So all of the content is from people. So when they go on and experience it, they're seeing people like them, which is often the challenge. And we had that in the Supper Club, that if we look at representation amongst scale-ups, we probably have 1 in 15, 1 in 20 of our members are female. And I don't know the exact stats because we've not collected them for our BAME representation. That's something we're addressing now. But I do think the George Floyd incident has changed the mindset. And if there's one positive thing that will come from this, is I think lots of business leaders I'm speaking to, ourselves included, are really thinking not just what can we do that's far more proactive. And I'm seeing a lot of people taking a look very hard at what they do and how they interact, not just how they employ, but their supply chain and everything. And I think that's a hugely encouraging move.
Absolutely. And again, Edwina was talking about the need to focus on the supply chain and look at that supply chain and look for opportunity within it, an opportunity to drive change. Before I open it up to questions, and if you have a question, please leave it in the YouTube chat. I want to ask each of you, what changes do you believe will happen to the world of work and how we manage and lead coming out of COVID? And are there positives? How do we hold on to those? And maybe, as we've still got you, Duncan, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Anne. I think, I mean, I like to be positive. So clearly we've been struck by something pretty horrendous and something that's having an impact we probably haven't seen in a century or more. But I think it makes us realize that risks are something that entrepreneurs and founders and businesses are often, we see risk all day, but seeing something so impactful, I think will be a wake-up call. So I know one of your other questions about renewable and climate change, I think it's going to have a very positive impact on that. And I'm pleased to see that government are making the right noises about pushing that agenda a little bit more. And let's just hope that we don't make the same mistakes we did with solar, where there's a bit of support and then it's pulled away. If you want founders to come in and do something, government has to be consistent. I think it's really important to get cross-party support and make sure it's, a policy that's in place for a decade or more, not 2 or 3 years and then it's pulled away because there's a policy change. I've now lost my train of thought. Sorry, I've been a bit thrown by all that tech issue. So,
don't worry.
Can you repeat the?
Yeah, and what else? So that's 2 aspects of management and leadership. And what other aspects of management and leadership do you think will change coming out of COVID?
Well, I think what's really positive is a lot of businesses that were maybe not as forward thinking. In other words, perhaps don't treat their employees with the sort of autonomy and trust that they might do, have been forced to do so because people have been largely working from home. And I think there's going to be a byproduct that I think people will return to the offices. I think most people need some interaction, but I think we'll see a lot more flexibility in where people work. I think it's accelerated digital transformation, which is only a good thing in my book. I think that allows businesses to embrace tools that make it much easier to let people work where work works best for them. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And I guess the final piece close to my heart in the new business or newer business, LearnAmp, is that I think people will increasingly reach out and drive their own kind of learning and development. I think we know that things have been accelerating enormously, and I know a lot of people on furlough have been taking the chance to reskill, which I think is a positive move. I just hope that employers are as supportive, and employees or freelancers, if they take their own route, are quick to take on the opportunity to skill themselves up and don't see it as a one-off. I think it's, the world is changing so rapidly, and if we take one thing away from this kind of COVID-19 challenge, is that we are masters of our own destiny if we choose to be so. And if we can reach out, find out what skills we need, not just digital skills, but what interpersonal skills we can develop, and become more self-aware about the things that work for us, I think people will be more fulfilled in work. They'll find work that suits them better, and we'll all be better off as a result of it. So it's a move to not being educated or trained, but to drive our own learning and development.
Great. Edwina, what are your thoughts before I go to the questions?
Well, I love that, because taking the lead in your own life is one of the themes that I hold very dear. And what you've just said, Duncan, I believe is the opportunity that comes out of this. I have an absolute respect for everybody who's been working from home. I've seen it in my team doing utterly brilliant work, taking the lead themselves. I find that, hugely uplifting, and from it I take great strength. So I also echo your comments on wake up call, because I think a lot of business has been doing things the same old, same way. Let's not rock the boat, let's not change anything. Well, it's all changed. So I think one thing that will happen now is, by God, there will be change, and big change, and it will be scary, but it will also be great. And I agree with you, it will unleash a whole new wave of energy, talent, self-belief. Out of bad things often comes good.
Totally.
Fabulous. Great note to turn to our questions on. The first one here is from Emma. Often entrepreneurs thrive on the back of a crisis, and new rapid growth startups begin to scale. Edwina, you mentioned this in regard to your business at the end of the 80s. Can you think of an example of this from the last recession? And what do you think was the key to their success? Well, Edwina, do you want to start with that?
Whoa. Well, interestingly, you see, what I found really interesting was that Amazon declared that they wanted to be the most customer-centric business in the world the year after we launched Clubcard. And they did pretty well, didn't they? I mean, wow, amazing. Look, I think, seeing businesses that have gone completely digital, e-commerce businesses right from the beginning, they have become so self-sufficient. They're data savvy. They follow and know their customers so well. I think they've been able to respond and adapt in this new world. The ones that are really, really struggling are the ones who've got the foot in the old world and a foot in the new. The ones who've got bricks and mortar and a bit of e-commerce, but they hadn't quite worked out how they all fit together, and they're owned by different people and the technology is very different. I mean, they're hurting at the moment. And so what can we learn from that? What entrepreneurial, creative skills can we learn from that? Which is, when there's a new way, jump in, do it.
And jump in with both feet, right? Not one foot here and one foot in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Duncan, for you, the next question is from Carrie. Is now a good or a bad time to start a business? What are your tips for those thinking of going it alone?
I think it's a great time to start a business for two reasons. One, when you see massive change, there's always opportunity in it. And I was just going, in relation to the last question, the thing I remembered most from the last downturn or recession was that our members all made hay. They did terrifically well. And I think we always get sort of hung up on a macro position of, where the general economy is going. And I have this thing about averages, which of course GDP is. They can be terribly misleading. We shouldn't get too down about that. If you go out and you can find a customer, whatever it is you do, you could be a digital analyst, or you could be a marketer, or you could be anything. If you're good at what you do and you passionately go out and speak to a few people, it is not that difficult to find somebody who will pay you to do something, whether it's a project or ongoing or what have you. And then you're your own boss. So if you can find a customer for something that you can deliver well, it isn't that hard. The admin, all the other things are easy enough to figure out, if they are a bit of a pain in the. But I would say any time is good. But the big thing is, in downturns, if you're selling B2B or even to consumer, people are looking for value. So they're ready to switch. One of the hardest things often for agency business or B2B selling into larger businesses is in the good times, big businesses have their roster of agencies or who they deal with, and they're not always looking to switch. But the moment they've got a bit of pressure on them to cut cost or find better value, that's where opportunity lies. So anyone looking to start now, ignore the macro picture because it's too depressing, and focus on the fact, if you've got something good about what you do, there are huge opportunities to go out. There are people out there dying to find better value than they've got already.
So that's a great uplifting answer. And Edwina, do you have anything to add to that before we go to our next question?
No, I completely agree. I mean, when we started John Humby, and we started work with Tesco, and for the first few years they absorbed all of our growth, and everybody kept saying to us, oh my God, this is really bad for you. You've got over-reliance on one client. It's going to kill you. Actually, it didn't. It made us better. It made us stronger. And I agree with Duncan that finding just one client who loves you and who believes in what you do is probably the safest, greatest way to build your skill and build your business. And I think it's much underrated. I think if you can prove that you're highly valuable to one, chances are you're going to be very valuable to 10 or 20 or 100.
Absolutely.
That's great. It certainly worked for Dunnhumby and
It certainly did.
So a proven track record there. Question from Amin. What do you think big business can learn from perhaps smaller organizations that are scaling up despite COVID? Well, Duncan, you have a scale up question, a group in the Supper Club. Why don't you start us on that?
Well, I guess the obvious one is agility. So the ability to move quickly. I mean, just the speed with which, well, not only that we had to, the Supper Club is until 8, 9, 10, where are we? 12, 13, 14 weeks ago now, isn't it? Time flies by. Most of the things that we did were bringing people face to face, and we had 1 week to determine how do we completely reshape the business, which we did. We sat down, met for about 2 or 3 days, reinvented it, and took it out and started doing everything digital and setting up an online community. And yes, we lost some members, but actually we've added great value and we've got a completely new direction. And we really did the substance of that in less than a week. Now, bigger businesses clearly have more people to take with them. And I think culturally also they tend to attract people. It's a generalization, but I think those that join a startup and are used to that are used to swifter decisions and movement. And that can be quite unsettling if you come from an environment that's not like that. So I think there's one way to do it is to break innovation out into a separate group. I'm like, it's nice to see it across the piece, but some people are very good at incremental improvement and taking the status quo, but just moving the kind of tanker very slowly, and others are much better at the seismic 10 times sort of shift. And I think if you can find people to fit into either camp, you can mix it up a little bit, but basically people tend to like one or the other. Very few are very good at both. So I think if larger companies are trying to learn from smaller businesses, it's maybe poach a few people, but don't try and wedge them into a round hole if they're a square peg. Find an environment internally where it's sort of intrapreneurial, if you want to use that word, where they can thrive.
So faster decision making, more agility, and playing to people's strengths. Edwina, what are your thoughts on what can big businesses learn from successful smaller startups?
Well, what I've observed of big businesses is that they are fantastically good at driving efficiencies. I mean, it is a skill to drive efficiency all the way through the supply chain. I mean, it's a great skill. And they can also be, not always, the best, are great at execution. And that has my total admiration. So a company that is good at executing strategy and plans are the most amazing of all. Entrepreneurial small businesses, I think, tend to be really good at innovation, proof of concepts, getting started quickly, trying something, failing fast, refining. They are completely different skills. And I would agree totally, again, with Duncan. I mean, put me in a big business to drive efficiency, I don't think I'd be very good. I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I like trying new things, failing a few times, and then getting excited about the thing that works. I mean, you put me in the wrong job, I'd be a disaster.
Well, thank goodness you've been put in the right job, because you are a serially and seriously successful founder of many startups. So as are you, Duncan. So it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you both. I do apologize to everybody for the tech issues, but I'm so glad we finally got to hear from you, Duncan. And thank you both for your very wise words. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And next week, you will hear from us again on yet another wonderful topic. Take care until then and stay safe.
Thank you, and apologies.
Thank you.